Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 3 of, I don't know really what to call this. It's like we called it Bros Talking Pros, but after that we just kind of, I don't know. But anyway, I'm Britton, also known as Samoki Dude. Um, YouTuber, reader, also author of A Plague of Nightmares. I'm proud to finally say that. I'm here with Jason. How you doing, man?
Great. Thanks for having me, dude. And congrats on your draft one.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it. I'm still.
How's draft two coming?
Oh, there's a lot of it is just like I'm looking through it. And I'm like, I should get rid of some of the. Like, there's one part where I said it's like nighttime, and then I repeated it. I'm like, damn it. I do that a lot. I've noticed,
Mm.
but it's all right. It's not doing too badly.
Good.
But
So what are we talking about today?
well, we're back on this like I guess show that we're doing, talking about so I finally decided, you know what, I'm really gonna tickle Jason's pickle with this I'm
What?
and I'm like, hey Jason, you want to talk about characters this time? He's just like, hell yeah I do. So now we're here.
Yeah. No pickles were harmed in the recording of this video.
Also, I am very interested in characters because I'm often frustrated when I'm writing, and I'll be like doing the work, and I'm thinking, but are these characters vivid? Because I always hear all these people going, man, these characters, and I've said this too, so I'm a bit of a hypocrite here, but I'm always hearing people say, oh, these characters, they just leaped off the page. I'm like, well, what does that mean exactly? Well, Jason, I hear you talk about character more than anything, so I'm sure you have some more knowledge on this than I do. So, yeah, we're gonna talk about
So
character
where
today.
do let's talk about character. So I always talk about irony
Uh,
and trauma. So I believe irony and trauma are two very strong
Irony or
aspects of
irony?
charactership.
Irony.
Irony. Irony.
Is that like a California
Like
accent? Like
a
it sounds like
uh,
you're
like
saying
a like a
irony.
big like a big guy who's weak, right? Or
Oh,
a skinny guy who's strong, right?
uh,
Those kinds of things. Irony, something that's unexpected, because the last thing you want is sort of a Joe normal character. And I think irony piques our interest, right? Because it creates an unusual person, the unexpected, right? That's why it's ironic. So that's one thing, but I think trauma is a massive, massive, massive thing that a lot of people neglect. And
well,
I think a lot of people neglect it because, go ahead.
finish your thought and then I'll.
I was going to say because I mean, I'm sure you've heard it's cliche by now, but a character needs a flaw of some kind. Now, a flaw can be related to trauma, it doesn't have to be. It could be something else. But generally, you want someone who has some baggage to a degree. They don't have to be like completely down on their luck or anything like that, dragging themselves through the gutter, but you want to have that kind of something, something that is just like lurking in the back, that is pulling the strings from time to time, that is revealing their weaknesses, that is sort of affecting them in the plot.
Sure. I'll admit I was like, well, should because I like to keep these organized slightly and come up with questions, but I'm like, you know what? Let's just kind of talk, see where it goes. I only could come up with, well, two. I guess like, I guess one. I guess really it comes down to what makes a good character and what makes a bad character. Um,
So I will
so I guess
quote
that's
Matt
what
Bird. Yeah, go ahead.
So that's what I'm. That's kind of the main point of our conversation. Basically, is what I was hoping for, and then we can kind of
Yeah,
just
yeah.
go
Let's
from
talk
there.
about the good. So, I read this fantastic book. Highly recommend it for any writer out there. It's called The Secrets of Character. It's by Matt Bird. He also wrote The Secrets of Story, which is another fantastic book about story structure. And it's not traditional in the sense where it's like, oh, Act One, Act Two, Act Three kind of thing. It's more like you should probably have these elements in this part of the story. So it's kind of structural, but it's less like your traditional structure. But anyway, his character book, The Secrets of Character, is like that, but from a character standpoint. So his premise, his thesis, I guess, is called. He has three things that you must do within the first 10 pages. Believe in the reality of the hero, care about the hero's circumstances, and invest their hopes in the hero. Oh, invest their hopes in the hero being the reader or viewer if it's a film. Hopes in the hero to solve this problem. So those are the three things that he argues in this book. And I believe he has a very convincing argument, and he gives you a laundry list of things to do and how to evoke those three things, right? While you're reading. I think trauma is definitely a big one, because it gives us something to relate to, first of all, right? There's some kind of hidden pain. Well, not hidden, but there's a distant pain, and you can use that as a tool, like I said, to reveal the character or reveal their shortcomings, or maybe they are experiencing this narrative to overcome that trauma often.
Yeah, I should also note I didn't want to just stick to merely books because I try to do things
This is
differently on some Okie Dude, but I mean I did want to talk about movies or games or whatever you want, or whatever
well,
we want
this
basically.
applies. Yeah, this applies to any creative medium that has a character in it. This
Yeah,
is
pretty
not
much.
just novels. It is anything.
Unless well, I guess unless it's like nonfiction, but even then.
Well, that then it becomes tricky because you want to tell the real story, right? You don't want to just change history
Sure.
to make
Yeah.
it more compelling, which is another reason why I rarely read nonfiction because it bores the hell out of me most of the time.
Yeah, it's. I don't want to talk too much about that. That's another discussion for another time. So,
Definitely.
but oh man, man? I've grappled
So I
with
mean,
what
that's
makes.
that's really what makes a good character, like specificity. You were talking about vividness, right?
Yeah.
So I think a specificity is a good way of thinking about what makes someone vivid, right? It's maybe a strange way of talking, maybe it's a strange way of walking, maybe it's a habit they have, maybe it's a
It's what they
something they
look
carry
like.
around with them. Yeah, what they
Talking to
look
you,
like,
J.K.
right?
Rowling.
Yeah, you create the tricky thing here is though is it's really easy to fall into a caricature, which you don't want
Sure.
to do. I feel like we were just talking about Donald Ray Pollock off the before we went live. He gets really close to that, to where you're like, this person doesn't exist, but he always like balances that line perfectly. So he takes you so far to the edge where you're like, God damn, this guy is so, or this woman or whoever is so interesting. But right before they turn into like a clown or a cartoon character or something, he pulls back and he really hits you with this like this weight of just emotional resonance, which is great.
Yeah, Pollock's on my list for reads next year. So thought you'd know. I thought you should know, Jason.
Well,
But
I hope you enjoy it.
I
I
find
recommend I recommend reading them in chronological order. By the way, knock 'em stiff,
yeah,
Devil All
that's
the
what I
Time.
was
Yeah,
thinking. Or maybe
definitely.
I'll go with like Devil all the time or something. But anyway, I don't know yet. But um, character is something I also am worried about when I read. I know, very shocking, but I think it's a very important thing because characters are kind of the window through which you see the story. So if you make them interesting, then well, you got a good story on your hands. Um, but even then, it's kind of hard because I'm like, people, they're people. They walk around, want things. They're lazy sometimes. They're hardworking at other times. It's a weird thing. But then again, I am only 22 years old, so I haven't lived I'm not lived as long as you have. But
You've lived almost exactly half as long as me, so
that's crazy. That's crazy.
yeah, I'm W. I could be your dad, but we've
I
already
know.
talked about that.
I know. That's crazy. I'm like,
But
oh,
why don't we talk about what was that?
I was like, I'm always like, oh, Jason's like a brother, but it's like, he could be my dad. It's weird.
Yeah, maybe
But
I'm your
anyway,
dad, Britton. Maybe I'm your dad.
oh no, but
Well, why don't let's talk about this. Maybe this is easier to do this way. So, why don't you name a favorite character of yours? Doesn't have to be your number one, and then we can dissect that character and figure out like what is it about that character that you enjoy so much.
oh man, there's so many. Um, Well, we'll go with one because he's often mentioned, and it's I actually was reading or I was going through it recently, but Glocta from the First Law is a character that comes to mind
Okay. I know
because
Glocta.
you
So
do know
what
Glocta.
about him? What about him
Um,
do you like?
well, I find him. It's kind of funny. I find Glocta interesting for the same reason that I find Tyrion from Game of Thrones interesting, is because there's this perception of who you think he'll be, like, because I guess, not to use more crude language, but a crippled person, often in things is presented as like, oh, that guy's crippled. Oh, that means he's a bad guy. And you kind of think that of Glock at first, because he's a crippled guy, but at the same time he's also a torturer. So he's not really, helping that. He's not really helping himself there.
Well, okay, let's
Hold,
pause
hold,
there.
hold, hold, hold on. Let me
Okay.
finish what I'm saying. But then you realize that, wait, there's a little more to this guy. He's not he's not a caricature. He's a person. He has his own problems. He is suffering through a lot of emotional and physical trauma every day of his life. And
Okay.
he also wants to be good. He wants, or at least there is a part of his soul that wants to be decent. He doesn't do a
Okay,
very
let's
good job, but he tries.
all right, let's take this character Glocta and let's break this down.
Okay.
So, something terrible has happened to him, right?
Yes.
Trauma.
Yes.
He was tortured.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What does he do for a living?
He's a torturer.
He tortures people. What is that?
He's inflicting
Irony.
trauma on people.
That is irony.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So he's
Oh
got
shit! I didn't
trauma.
even think of that.
This is what I want. This is why I brought this up, because this is how you have to do it. You can't. It's you can say all of the things you like about a character, but if you break it down to their most basic things or basic traits, you'll see how these repeat. Okay, because that once you understand that, or readers or writers understand that, you'll be like, oh, now I know the formula to make an interesting character, right? So we have trauma. Glocta was tortured very, very terribly. We have him now. He tortures people. Holy shit, that's ironic. He was tortured. Why would he torture people? So we have these two things. But we also have a flaw, right? You said
Mm.
he wants to be a good person. So he is struggling against himself in a way because he wants to do the right thing, but he's just constantly bombarded by this trauma. This trauma is like a
Well,
rain cloud over his head all the time.
well, for one, he's kind of a miserable asshole who wants everyone to be as miserable as he is. But at the same
Exactly.
time,
Why?
there's a flicker in his soul, and this sounds really corny, I'm sure, but there is a flicker in him, in his heart, in his soul, whatever you want to say, that wants to be good. That wants he thinks there has to be something better than this, but the world of the First Law is not a nice place. By God.
Right. And so that's why Galacta works, because you empathize with him. You know
Sure.
he was tortured terribly. Even though he is a very cruel man and does the torturing himself, you learn through the course of the books why he's doing it. Because he has this trauma, right? He's been terribly hurt. It's irreversible. He can never go back. And that I think empathy is a core, especially with a villain too. I think a lot of people forget that is that it's not just the hero or the protagonist that you need to empathize with. It's the villain as well. Everybody, you need to understand them. You don't need to agree with them. So you could take Walter White, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're familiar with it. Great, great character.
Yeah,
How does he
I have a
start?
Breaking Bad shirt.
Yeah, how does he start? Cancer,
He has
right?
cancer. He works at a
That's his
job that
problem.
he's dissatisfied in. He works in another job that's even worse.
Well, slow down. So
Oh,
first he
okay.
has cancer. What does he do? He says, "Oh, I'm going to cook this meth to provide for my family.
Mm,
I'm a super nice guy." He's this goofy, quirky chemistry teacher. And then he gets mixed up into making meth. And then what happens? The meth takes over. He transforms
I was about to say,
into
it
somebody
made it
else.
sound like he gets addicted to the meth. I'm like,
No,
eh,
no, no. I
no.
mean, it takes over his persona, right?
Yeah,
He becomes, I am the one who knocks or whatever he
yeah.
says. And the great thing about Walter White, he's, I guess you could consider him an anti-hero, is that there was a point where I knew people stopped watching the show because he went too far for them. For me, I loved every damn moment of it because literally every terrible thing he did, you could say you don't have to agree with it, but you're like, okay, he justified it, right? There was a justification behind his actions. Now, it doesn't mean it's morally right. And I think that was the beauty of that show is that no matter how dark it got, there was if you were to pull yourself out of the moral realm into more of like an objective viewpoint, you're like, well, I mean, I could see why he would have done that. That makes sense. But I think the beauty of it he started off trying to provide for his family, doing something very good. And then he got taken over by this power, the sense of power, because he was good at something, which brings me to another point. That is another thing your character can be. They can be extremely skilled at something. Because a lot of times people want to follow someone who feels like they have their shit together.
People
They
like
know their stuff.
competence.
They like competence, so
You
he
know,
was a very smart chemist.
you know how many people I see. I know you're. You know how many people I see who talk about, oh man, Tywin's based as fuck. I'm like, it makes you wonder
Who?
how Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones.
Uh,
Um, and he's very competent, even though he's an evil man. And it makes you wonder, how I kind of that's interesting to me. Like, how far because people like competence, right? Well, like
that is a trait. Yeah.
far do you want to take that? I guess that's why I like about I hate calling them anti-hero shows because it's not really that they're anti-heroes. They're mainly they would be villains in any other category. But
Well, let's talk about how this guy defines anti-hero. At
okay.
first glance, he might not be admirable, but we quickly find he's got guts and skill. So he becomes empathetic, such as a mean mom boss in The Sopranos, professional thieves, wise guys, Heat, friendly serial killers, Dexter. I think Dexter's a great example.
I wouldn't call
Or
Dexter
drunken
friendly.
superheroes, Hancock. Not that I saw that stupid movie, but I know what it is.
Well, you don't. Oh, you haven't seen Hancock, or you have?
Hell no.
Wasn't that bad?
Hell no.
Though it could have been better for sure. I would have brought up Batman, but I didn't want you to roll your eyes.
Yeah, so you look at this guy and you're like, oh, he's kind of an asshole. But there's some qualities about him that are redeeming.
Sure.
So you can empathize, right? I think that's what it is. And so if you take Walter White, he started off great. He turned into kind of an anti-hero because he's okay, like murdering, right? He's okay risking the life of a child with poison, with the ricin, I think it was, right? Um, but he's incredibly skilled, and he can somewhat justify. I think he can justify. I'd argue he can justify every action he had. Now, again, I'm not
Well,
talking about
till the
morals here.
end, when he's kind of like,
Yeah, but
you know what? I actually kind of like doing it, Skylar. Sorry, I ruined your life. I'm gonna go murder all these neo Nazis now.
yeah, that's what I mean. He was over. It's a tragedy. Breaking Bad is a tragedy. So
Yes.
I think that's one thing to. So Aristotle had a comedy, and he had a tragedy. So a comedy doesn't mean laugh out loud. It means, the character wins, the hero wins. A tragedy is when the hero loses. And so Breaking Bad, you could argue, was a tragedy. And I, I read the nutshell method, which the entire book is built around that comedy and tragedy. And that was a real eye opener for me because I was working on this book. I was confused about the character and stuff, and I realized I'm writing a tragedy, but I'm using a plot like a beat sheet to outline a comedy. So I was like, holy shit, that's my problem. But
I
anyway,
read one
I'm
of your
getting
books, Jason. As you know, we did a discussion on that. I was not laughing a lot during that book.
No,
I was
I
I
love
was I was kind of
tragedies.
confused.
I love, yeah, I love I love the fall of the hero. Now, granted, I do like a lot of movies where the hero wins too, but there's just something that's just so bittersweet and cathartic about someone who means well, but then absolutely fails. Because I think for me, it's I know a lot of people read books to experience characters or stories who take them away from this dark, dark world we live in, right? But I think the great thing about antiheroes and tragedies are that it reminds you like not everything works out, and I think it's a great learning experience to fictionally visit those places and without it being harmful to anybody.
Well, sure, yeah. Ah. So I don't want any spoilers because I haven't read this book yet. But would you call Tender as the Flesh a tragedy?
Whew. Yeah, I would say it's a tragedy. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, definitely.
When I think of tragedy, I think like Shakespeare or those or like Arthur Miller. The Crucible.
Sure. Yeah, there's blatant tragedies. Tender is the flesh.
Oh,
Like it, when you read it, I'll be curious to talk to you about it because I can't like I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's in that weird gray zone, man, and I love the gray.
yeah. I mean, I guess the stories I enjoy is when the heroes, or I guess ones I have like the biggest spot in my heart for is when like the heroes win, but it's at like a great cost. Or kind of like Breaking Bad, even though I wouldn't call Walter White heroic by any means of the imagination.
No, I mean
Which is
you
why,
could argue
which
that.
is sort of a gripe of mine. Like everyone calls those like stuff like The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, like anti-hero shows. I'm like, they're not heroic.
Well, that's why it's called antihero.
Sure, I guess, but
I think the word hero is a. I don't like the word hero because it implies something, right? It's sort of
implies
like,
good
yeah, right. The word hero. That's why I prefer protagonist,
protagonist. Yeah.
someone who is proactively doing something to move the
Well, yeah,
story
sure. That
forward.
that makes sense. Like
I think that's better because it's more neutral. Hero is, like you said, there's baggage.
yeah. No. But I suppose what makes characters interesting for me is the role they serve in the story, but also what they want, what they desire, versus the setbacks. I discussed this with a friend of, or well, I guess we're friends. Anyway, but someone I talked to on my podcast a while back, and he mentioned that characters are often defined by like how you make an interesting character is you give them wants and you give them needs, and then those clash, and that's what makes them interesting.
That's one thing. Yeah,
Um,
of course. Yeah, you have a conscious level and then a subconscious, right?
like
So like your conscious is I want to save the world, but your subconscious need is more like I don't know. I need to get over my daddy issues, just hypothetically,
yeah,
right?
like he was talking about one of my favorite shows, BoJack Horseman, where I know you're snickering, but we see BoJack. What he wants is to be admired and to feel, validated. But what he needs is to actually deal with the crap that he's gone through in his life, and those do clash throughout the show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if I could, like, for like though I don't know if that's an objective thing. I mean, I'll play like The Last of Us or something, and I'll think, okay, well, what does Joel want versus what does Joel need?
Let's talk about it.
Okay,
Okay,
big
Joel,
fans,
what does he
big
want?
big fans of The Last of Us here. What does
Yeah, yeah.
Joel?
What
What does Joel
does Joel
want?
want?
Oh
You tell
God.
me.
By the time that the game begins, at first he wants to just kind of get on with his life, do his job, take Ellie, take her to the place. He's very like objective oriented, right? Like that's kind of the thing about Joel. He doesn't really have a purpose in Last of Us. And that's kind of what the story is about, really, for me, is him finding that purpose again.
I would say, yeah,
What
he wants to.
I can say what he needs. What he needs is to get over his daughter's death.
Right.
You know, come to
That
terms,
is what he needs.
Or, well, not get over, because you can't get over something like that. But, you know, come to terms with it. Go like, you know what?
Correct.
That happened. God, I'm gonna sound like such a dickhead here, but no, I gotta get over this. You know, like I gotta make my peace with it. Even though I guess you can't really in situations like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. So he wants to have a normal life. He wants to have a purpose. He wants to, at some point take Ellie to the Fireflies or whatever, right?
Sure, yeah.
And then, but yeah, he needs to
Also,
accept.
he needs to connect with people too, because he's like,
Yeah, yeah, but
he's pushing people away throughout the story until he meets Ellie, and then Tess dies, and also I'm spoiling the shit out of this, but
if you haven't played The Last of Us by now,
then
yeah,
I don't know what to tell you.
It's like
But,
old as hell. Yeah, I mean that's
what he
it.
needs is to learn that it's good to connect to people. It's good to make relationships with people. If you push everyone away, you'll end up like Bill.
Right, and
because they put Bill in there for a reason, and it's basically like knocking Joel on the head, like, "Hey, Joel, don't do that."
Yeah, it's so he's got an obvious trauma. He lost his daughter. The irony is not so much with Joel, but about the event. The irony is that he lost his daughter. He's trying to come to terms, with the loss. But the irony is, oh, guess what? You're forced to take this girl, who probably is more or less would be your daughter's age, close enough, across the country. So he's having to face his trauma or his loss the entire time, because all he's reminded of, even though Ellie is very different than his daughter, it's still that kind of archetype. And I think that's why The Last of Us works so well. Is it's not Joel in isolation. It's Joel and Ellie, and I talk about this a lot too. Is it's not just the protagonist. It's the characters that surround the protagonist that need to complement them in some way.
Even The Last of Us 2 kind of does this. It's like, like, what does Ellie want? She wants to kill everyone who killed Joel. Well, what does she need? She needs to face she pushed Joel away, and she was angry at him for so long, and just as because Neil Druckmann's an asshole, he had to tear my heart out and go, oh, hey, guess what? They were gonna make up, and then he gets brutally murdered. So you know what, Neil Druckmann? Fuck you. Fuck you, man. Ugh,
oh, she needed to forgive Joel, essentially.
Yeah. No, I get that, but I'm still mad.
But she needed to forgive maybe I don't know, she wants to forgive Joel, but she can't. She needs to.
She was about to.
And I think that's again, that's the beauty of it too. Right, the beauty of it is that and I've critiqued books and movies this way too, when there is a relationship like that, but then right before the person dies, let's say, they reconcile. That is not the way you do it. You never allow them to reconcile, just like they did in The Last of Us 2, because then it is an absolute.
But Jason, they almost did. It wasn't that they did; they almost did.
That's what I'm saying. That's good. That's why it works.
Okay.
It works because they can never reconcile. Joel is dead. They can never do it, and so that lack of completion, right? That lack of closure, is what messes with us.
It makes me think of another book I read called "Darkness Take My Hand" from Dennis Lehane, but I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to spoil it, because I don't think you've read that yet. You should.
Nah, but you can if you want.
It's really good.
I told you to tell me which book. If you could pick one Lehane book, what would it be?
I'd say start with The Drink Before the War, but
really,
yeah. But you
Okay.
could start with any of them if you want. But I'd start with like Drink Before the War to get kind of your feet wet. But um, but yeah, there's a situation like that in that book. I mean, I like. Well, anyway, I don't want to get too. But yeah, going back to Joel. But it's like, but yeah, I've thought about that ever since he's told me that. Though, funnily enough, he's not much of a reader, which I think is hilarious because, like, if you looked at him, you think, oh, maybe he's like a nerd. He probably reads stuff. Nope. But he likes
Who,
movies a
Joel?
lot.
Who are you talking about?
No, the guy I was talking to about the wants and needs when
Oh,
it comes to characters.
yeah.
His name's Chris. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. It's something I've thought about since then. Because, I don't know if it's that simple because, it's, but you could definitely see it.
That's part. That is one part. Generally, a want and a need. It's more about the arc
Like,
of the character.
like,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Like, I'll put it this way. Like, the road. What does, like, okay, the man wants to get his son to somewhere that's safe. But what does he need? Because sometimes I can't, it's
He
not
needs
real.
to face that his son. He needs to face that he'll never be around. He's not going to be around forever, and he must let his son go. He must let
Oh,
him live. That's what he needs
son of a bitch! I didn't
because he's
think of
he's
that.
protecting him the entire time,
Damn
right?
it!
He is obsessed with protecting him, like a parent would their child, regardless. But he knows he's dying from the very beginning of the book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Spoilers, sorry guys.
Who hasn't read, like the three people who haven't read The Road?
Yeah, it's around the Pulitzer Prize. It's a short book. Go read it. But when you get to yeah, the whole time he's dying, and so he needs to accept the fact that I'm not going to be here. I got to let my son go. My son has to live, and so that's why he's obsessed with teaching him how to do things, teaching him how to kill himself. I think to me that was the most the strongest part of the entire book, the bond between them two.
When he tried to teach his son how to kill himself.
Yeah,
I'll say that's really
because
messed
you're like,
up.
holy shit, that's why it works.
Yeah.
This is what I mean, man. You got to dig deep with characters. You got to dig deep with story. The surface stuff, I mean, yeah, if you want to
The
have
most
like,
terrifying part I remember when I watched the movie for the first time is when they're in that house with the like livestock people, and he's like pointing the gun at the kid's head. I'm like, good lord, ugh.
well, you
Imagine
remember in the
doing that.
book,
I'm not even.
yeah,
I'm
in
not
the
a
book,
parent, but like I can't even imagine doing that. And I'm sure you were like watching it and reading it, and you're just like, I can't even imagine doing that.
well, yeah, then that's why it works. That's why it's effective. That's why I think to really have powerful fiction, you need to dig deep. With a powerful character, granted, there's plenty of people who like the light stuff. It's the mainstream audience, and if that's who you're catering to, sure, like be light, be Marvel Comics, whatever you want to do. But if you want to really tell powerful stories, you got to do that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that makes you go like, holy shit, that's heavy. And you're going to lose your audience. And I say this quote all the time. Nick Refn, director of Neon Demon and Drive and tons of shit, he always says if half of your audience hates it and half of them love it, you've made art. And so you have to be
I don't
okay
know if it's
with
that objective though.
alienating your audience.
Like I have a
It's not
problem with that
objective.
quote. But I don't think it's that like I don't think it's black and white in that way. You know, like Watchmen's well loved, and most people, unless you're uh, you know
I wouldn't say Watchmen's well. You mean the comic or you mean
the comic. I'm talking about the
the
comic.
comic? I would say it's
I don't know
critically
a lot of
acclaimed.
people. Now, Alan Moore has alienated people, but I don't know about Watchmen. I've
Well,
met a
here's the
lot of
thing.
people who
Here's the
were
thing.
alienated by Watchmen.
If you find a kid who loves Spider-Man, right?
Hmm.
Amazing Spider-Man, the most generic, or Superman, the most generic
I was
motherfucking
about to say,
people
if you
there are.
talk shit about Spider-Man, we're gonna have to fight.
I grew up on Spider-Man, right? But the most
Okay, fine.
generic,
I'll let you get away with
mainstream,
Superman.
you get a fan of these comics and you have them read Watchmen. I guarantee you, most of them will probably hate it. Because again, people fall into these categories where they want the escapism. They don't want the sour stuff. They don't want to like contemplate all of this dark shit. They escape to read the Spider-Man, and it never gets dark. It never gets bloody. Um, then you read the Watchmen, and you're like, Holy shit! This is like a literary novel basically.
Yeah,
That's what I mean.
I get you. It's kind of you know, Watchmen is kind of to superheroes. You've seen Unforgiven, right? It
Yes.
Unforgiven does a similar thing with the Western genre. It's like
Sure.
here's I was watching a video from Leanne's library the other day. She was talking about Red Country from Joe Abercrombie. Okay, that's a big segue there. And she was talking about how, and I was kind of sad because she didn't like Unforgiven. Now, I'll admit I can understand people who might not like Unforgiven. I mean, it's not a typical Western. It's slow. It makes you. It's kind of. Damn it! I'm feeding in your point now. It's making me upset, but I'm not upset. But yeah, I can see why people, or Blood Meridian for that instant. I can see why people might not like that
Mm-hmm.
because it's really messed up. Though Unforgiven's
Mm-hmm.
more like realistic. In Blood Meridian, it's more like surreal. You're like, what?
Yeah, Blood Meridian is surreal. I'd agree with that. It's been,
Blood Meridian's like Unforgiven times 10.
I mean, it's been way too long. I can't even comment on Unforgiven. It's been decades since I've seen that movie, so I
I don't
honestly
know
have
how
no
it would be
memory of it
imprinted in
really.
your brain, when Clint Eastwood,
Yeah.
which after watching that movie, I'm like, damn, why didn't they give him more villain roles? He would have killed it, But then, yeah. Anyway,
He has that cool collected hero, the troubled dark hero. I think that's why Clint Eastwood works as a hero.
I'm just saying, he was terrifying and Unforgiven. But anyway, I'm getting off subject. But going back to Glocta though, it's like, what does Glocta want? Well, he wants to go back to, or it's kind of tough with, like what Glocta needs. Like, I know that what he needs is to like make those hard choices to be a good person, to be what he wants to be, which is kind of the point of the first law. You can't just be good just because you want to do it. You have to work for it. Which, I know you haven't read. I'm sure you haven't read the first law in a while, but that's kind of what
Yeah,
I took
since
from it.
publication.
Or Logan Nine Fingers. What he wants is to get away from this violent past he has. But what he needs is to like, which is sort of deconstructed because like when he goes back to the north, it kind of blows up in his face. But what he needs is to face what he did as the Bloody Nine, rather than just run.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the beauty of the anti-hero in a way, or like a tragedy, is that they succumb to what they are. They can't not be what they are. They
Or
they
like,
they strive for it. Like Glocta, right? At
or
the
like
end,
with,
he's like,
or I was
"Well, I
about to
guess I'm
say,
just gonna fucking do this."
but yeah, exactly. I was about to say, well, Glocta by the end is like, you know what? All this shit's blown up in my face. You know what? Being a good person, overrated. I'm gonna be a monster
Exactly.
and I'm gonna
He
play up the stereotype,
Right.
basically.
And that to me,
Kind of exactly like Tyrion's arc in the books.
yeah. So to me, that's very interesting
Yeah.
because again, it's tragic. It's a tragic story. It's that we always expect when characters arc that they are going to, they have their want, like you said at the beginning. Well, they have their want and need at the beginning, but at the end, they don't get what they want, but they get what they need. That's why I like to
I don't
look
know,
at it.
but
Yes,
I don't know, but like with I know you're not talking about a lot of characters, but I don't think Glocta got what he needed though, because
no, that's what I'm saying. He didn't. He did not arc in that. He fell back into the trap of who he was. So he was trying to overcome what he was. Okay, but he
mm-hmm.
did. He lost. It's a tragedy.
Well, yeah.
So when you get what you need, you can. It can be a tragedy. It can be a comedy. You can succeed. You might not get exactly what you want, but you get what you need, and you come out on the other side. You've grown, right? You've transformed. The hero has transformed. So it works both ways that way. You can succumb to, you can fail, or you can succeed.
You
And
know,
I think that's what's great about the first law. Not everybody likes it. Not everybody wants this guy to be. Oh, What? He didn't get all better and learn his lesson, and now he's not a torturer. He's still like, I hate that.
Well, Galacta's kind of a dickhead, so it
Well,
makes sense.
regardless, I mean, that's what I'm saying.
It
Like,
makes sense to me that he would
you
fall
have
back on
to.
because he doesn't know any better. Well, not really. Well,
Well, he
again, he's
couldn't beat the
trapped.
dark. He could not beat his demons.
He's
Okay.
trapped, which again is
Yeah,
kind of
he
the thing
well,
about, which is kind of the thing that brings all three of those characters in that series together. They're all trapped,
yeah,
all of them,
yeah.
in one way or
So
another.
here's a. I was gonna say let's. This is not a hero, but this is a great technique for a villain. Okay, so one of the most classic villains of all time, Darth Vader.
I was about to
He's
mention
this.
Star Wars, but
Well, think about it. He's this badass guy. You never see his face. He's completely emotionless. You think he's this one note monster, and then at the end, he unmasks, and you see he's like this chubby old man, and he looks
he's just
like
like
everybody
pitiful
else.
old man. Just
Yeah, and so you're like, holy shit, there's a real person behind this mask. And then you
yeah.
find out that he was corrupted, he was overtaken by the dark side, and again that, and then you are immediately like, I don't hate this guy anymore. Holy shit, I feel for this guy. And I think a lot of people forget that with villains.
You
So
should
many
hate
villains are.
you should hate Sidious, the
Hey, what?
the Emperor. Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
unlimited power guy.
yeah.
I think Jason just died inside there for a second, but it's okay.
But
Um,
yeah, again, I think the want and the need, yes, they, like your friend said, they do conflict throughout the whole thing, but it's sort of like also related to the arc. So when you get to the end,
well, I wanted to mention I don't think it's a black and white thing because it's kind of like there's some characters who I really like and I think are interesting. It's like, well, what is it that they like? For instance, um, Rorschach from Watchmen. Cutting back to real. I hope you really liked how I did that segue there. But Rorschach, we know what he wants, sure, because he says it. He's like he wants to punish evil. He wants to. He believes there is good, there is evil, nothing else. But what does he need?
well,
You
I
know,
think I think it's I think the Watchmen is more of a it's a deconstruction of the
sure,
superhero, right?
sure.
So it's Rorschach to me represents just anarchy, right? Just one note anarchy. Um, he he basically sacrifices himself at the end.
Yeah, but for what? Going back to that deconstruction thing. It's like,
Exactly.
sure, he
That's
died with his integrity intact, but he still failed to prevent this atrocity. What
right. Fail. You just said it.
he
He
failed, yeah.
failed. He
But then
failed.
again,
It's a tragedy.
which what's funny about Rorschach? He's both like the most popular character. He's somehow one of the most popular Watchmen characters, but at the same time, he's the most controversial one because he's like he always, which I hate when people say this, but he has like these problematic things about him, which yes he does. I'm not gonna deny that, but it's just gonna. But when you put him in that box, I get kind of annoyed because I feel like you're missing the complexity of that character or whatever. Or like when people are like,
Yeah.
oh, Tony Soprano toxic masculinity. I'm like, you're right, but you're kind of missing the point a little bit.
Yeah. Read the real story by Stephen R. Donaldson then, because he's doing a lot of stuff like that and he's doing the most just terrible, terrible things. And but again, he is exploring themes and
Mm.
archetypes. And I think yes, if you look at the surface,
What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Watchmen. Um, sure. I
you
didn't mean
keep
to
coming back
interrupt
to
you
the
there,
Watchmen.
but
No, no,
I
no,
mean,
go for it.
well, yeah, I kind of go back to Watchmen because like I'm like, well, here's how you combine all these great themes with character because that's always what I'm looking for: character and theme and story. There's also a bunch of other things I consider, but it's kind of the main three. But it's like sure, what Rorschach wants is like a morally binary world, basically. But like, what does he need to face his trauma? Because
I don't know that
I
he
think he's
wants that.
I think he's too far gone to do that now. It's
Yeah,
just
that's what I mean. He's I think that's why we empathize with Rorschach is that he's overcome by his trauma.
exactly,
And
you
so he
know.
has this worldview that sets him out to, um, just like you said, create this binary system where I will kill all bad people.
Yeah, it's kind of taking that like Batman idea and being like, okay, what would that be like? And it's like,
But
oh,
like
a
giving
crazy
Batman
person.
balls. Yeah, giving Batman balls basically.
Hold on a second. Batman is a very complex character. Okay, just saying. Don't even at me, bro.
No, 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 but he doesn't have balls because he
No, I'm
never
kidding.
kills anybody.
Sure, yeah, I get what you mean.
That's what I mean.
Though it's like, but it's kind of, it's like, yeah, sure, but like, what is, or what's
That's actually Batman's flaw.
Batman's flaw?
He can't kill anybody. So
Well, he doesn't.
Joker keeps coming
That's
back.
Well, that's what makes him heroic, Jason. See, like you see, he is a good character because we're arguing about
Flaw.
it.
Flaw.
Whatever. Anyway, um, uh, but yeah, no, but like going back to Rorschach, it's like which it's one of those things where you kind of feel dirty when you say, oh yeah, he's my favorite character, and then you kind of have to go, well, I don't agree with them. Let's just put that out of the way. But it's like, if he needs to face his trauma, well, fuck that. He ain't doing that anytime soon because he's already too far into the, you know. Or like Ozymandias,
Well,
like what does he need? Well, we know what he wants, but like what does he need per se? Like to find out that he can't save the world because you're not changing his mind on that.
I mean, yeah, like basically he needs to know that, because he's the smartest man who's ever lived, right?
Yeah,
So basically he needs to understand that intelligence is not everything.
sure. It's probably not
Yeah.
gonna, Which is
Al-
interesting about Watchmen because it's about a bunch of people who are like just broken in one way or another.
Yeah, that's why it's interesting. There's a lot of irony in Watchmen too,
Well, yeah,
right? So Dr. Manhattan,
the
he
most
gets to the
powerful
point where
being in the world,
yeah,
in the
but
universe,
he
even.
can't he's unlimited power, but he can't relate to the most base human things because time does not mean the same thing. Relationships don't mean the same thing anymore. So he's transcended into something else that can't really fathom these things any longer. He's lost his
Or
humanity.
yeah, exactly. Well, kind of. He does kind of get it back by, except he's just, or well, he kind of gets it back, and then he goes back. He's like, oh, bunch of people are dead. Well, later, fuckers. I'm gonna go make life
Yeah.
somewhere else. So
Yep.
I get yeah. Um,
Lost his humanity.
um, or like Night Owl. Oh, he's more normal, I guess.
I think it's better to not deconstruct, not to do this with Watchmen because Watchmen's doing something else with like a
Fair
big
enough.
cast. I think it's
Fair
better to
enough.
like
But there's a
look
lot to
at
like. I could make a whole video about Rorschach. Like it's or Ozymandias or any of those characters because there's a lot to talk about. Those are the characters I like the most. You can sit down and you can talk about them and be like, why did they do that? What did this mean?
well, they all have trauma. That's the number
Well,
one
yeah.
thing. Trauma
Well,
is it comes back to trauma. You got to have some kind of trauma. If you don't have trauma, the key thing about trauma though is so I finished Daniel Green's latest book, and the main character has a trauma. However, he does not use the trauma in any sense to grow the character, to become the flaw of the character. So it exists. I think that's one thing people need to understand. Just because a character has a trauma, if you don't use that trauma in the story, it doesn't matter. So a lot of times people do a paint by numbers approach when they do characters. They think, oh, well, he has this and he has this, or she or whoever has these. I got all these things. Why does nobody like my character? It's because you have to use them. It's kind of like what your friend was saying. The want and the need, the flaw, will it creates conflict throughout the story. Everything about those things relate to the plot. And if you don't do that, if you don't make those connections, it's going
well,
to be like, I don't give a shit if he lost his wife. Doesn't matter in this story.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I was actually thinking about my character because I'm kind of. Well, I mean, you know what? I'll talk about You know what? I'll ask you this, Jason. Who's a character that you were like, man, that, or well, you already kind of talked about Walter White, but like, what's another character, like in a book or game or whatever that you watched, or read or play that you were like, like what's a great character for you, and we can talk about that, like like that, like
It's tough. I could name some, but I think you're going to be disappointed because a lot of it has to do with the journey of the character, less about the character in isolation. But yeah, I mean Logan Ninefingers, he's a fan
sure,
favorite. I've always enjoyed him because again, he fills the void of he's a troubled outcast, but he's really fucking good. He's proficient, extremely proficient. And
yeah,
so a lot of
he's
times
very good
we
at what he does.
yeah,
Well,
we
what he
invest, but it's a
does.
very dark thing he does.
He was about to
So
say
we're
what he
in,
does isn't very nice. To quote
right,
Wolverine.
right. And so I think that again, I mentioned it earlier, but if you have a character who excels at something, that is something you can latch onto and have empathy. However, there needs to be a counterbalance to it. Um, but like Indiana Jones, I think is a great character.
I was gonna, it's funny
Not
in my
too
novel.
deep.
I'll admit in my novel, because like my character, not really I guess not really a spoiler, but he goes through a lot of shit in the novel. Like he gets beaten up, he gets stabbed, in the novel I just wrote. But no, I was actually inspired by Indiana Jones because you know what? He gets his ass handed to him a lot. And I'm like, you know what? I
Right,
want to do that because that makes him vulnerable, right? Like
right.
that makes him, and which is what Kingdom of the Crystal Skull didn't do. Which is why I was really disappointed with that movie, is because they kind of lost that. That Indy is just a guy. He's
Well,
not. I
that's what
mean, yes,
makes that's what
he is sort of a superhero, kind of. He can beat up the bad guys, but he's always getting like his ass handed to him. He's always getting out of things by the skin of his teeth.
right. That's again, that's irony again. So we have this guy.
It's like you
He's
watched
a
Chris Stuckman's action movie essay that he did.
right. Well, he's a character who is a college professor,
Mm-hmm.
but he's like, no, I'm a superhero. So he goes out. We see him wearing glasses, the little tweed suit and stuff. But he's like, you know what, man? I'm an adventurer. I'm a superhero. And what happens? First of all, he's afraid of snakes. Okay,
He is
he's
afraid of
doing all
snakes.
kinds of crazy shit, but he's afraid of snakes. Like you said, he gets his ass handed to him all the time. So he's not a superhero. He's not a great fighter. Yes, he
He
tends
can
to
scrap.
obviously
Hold on.
right. He can
He can
scrap.
scrap.
He can, but he's not like I think a perfect representation
Yeah, he's
of
not
what makes
Rama from
Indy
the raid who can just
right. But
beat
what
everybody
makes
up.
Indy so great, a great simple scene, is when he's in that crowd in the Raiders of the Lost Ark and he shoots the guy instead of the guy with a
Oh
sword and
yeah.
stuff, and he's like, ah, fuck it, boom. Because he's like, why would I fight this guy? Why would I be John Wick?
Honor for
No, I'm just,
suckers.
I,
Bang.
yeah, I want the easy way out, right? And so I think he's such a great character on so many levels. Like he's charming as well.
Which is
He's
funny
he's
because like
funny.
apparently like Harrison Ford actually had like dysentery, and
Oh,
he's like,
really?
"Can I just fucking shoot the guy so we can like wrap up here?" And Steven Spielberg's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Great, yeah, let's do it."
yeah. I remember that was like uh, improv. That was an improvisation. But yeah, I think that it's not. It's not. You have to think of like what category. That's why I was talking about this book. It's called The Story Solution: 23 Actions All Great Heroes Must Take. And there's anti-heroes. There's the tragic hero. There's the trickster hero. There's the catalyst hero. So there's all these kinds of heroes. There's the anti-hero, and you're like, okay, pick one of these, and then figure out what you need to do to make that hero or protagonist.
Yeah, but
So
yeah, but I guess I guess that kind of what throws me about like what makes a good character, because I'll read a book or I'll watch a movie where I'm like, I like these characters, they're fun to watch, I like watching them, but it's not like, but I'm not gonna be like writing a dissertation on like why they did what they did,
Well, that's why I think it's
or
important. Like, why don't you bring up some more characters and let's figure out? Because I guarantee you, they're going to have some of these elements we're talking about.
which I don't
Guarantee
know.
you.
Let me think of one where
Take
I thought the
anybody.
characters were solid,
Just take
but
one, not like characters, but like just pick a movie or a TV show or like a book or whatever, a comic, and just pick one, and we'll talk about it. Just like we did with Walter White, and just like we did with Galacta, because I think that is the best way to kind of unpack everything.
I'll just pull one out of the hat here. Comic Preacher from Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon. There's a character called Jesse Custer, who's the main protagonist of the story. The titular preacher, I must say. Though I can probably name what his wants and needs are pretty quickly. What he wants is to kind of live a life with his girlfriend Tulip, and get away from his fucking batshit insane family. But what he needs is to confront his crazy insane family and to deal with all that craziness, and also to find God.
But that doesn't make him a good character. Tell me more about, because I've never read Preacher. So why don't you tell me more about this guy so we can
let's see.
pick out
His
the
dad was
traumas, the ironies,
his dad was a veteran. His mom was part of this crazy religious family, with this just demonic woman, his grandma. They ended up kidnapping them. She would put him in a coffin and put him underwater in the coffin.
Sounds like, you know what this sounds like, Britton?
What?
Sounds like trauma to
It
me.
is trauma. His
Trauma.
dad got
There's
shot
one.
in front of him by
More trauma.
More trauma. Let's see. He then if I remember right, he pursues a life of crime, and then his
Who? The preacher does?
The preacher does before before his family kidnap him again and force him to become a preacher. Ow. And oh Lord, what else does he go through? I think his mom dies. And he
well, hang on. So he gets, he sees his dad dies. He has a lot of trauma in other ways, but then he decides to, like you said, go on a life of crime. So he's rebelling against his hyper religious background.
Yes.
So when he's a preacher, though, what is he doing? When he's the quote unquote preacher, what is he doing?
That's at the beginning of the story. He's basically preaching to a bunch of people. He's kind of stuck. I'll put it that way. He's stuck in this place where he needs to, kind of going back to the hero's journey thing, he needs the call to adventure. And then he ends up getting struck by this creature called, it's blanking on me. I think it's Genesis. And it basically, what it is that if he tells you to do something, you're going to do it. It's kind of like, did you ever see Jessica Jones, the first season of that show?
No, I mean, I know what it is, but no.
Well, there's a character in that called Kilgrave. It's David Tennant, and he basically does the same thing. Like he tells you to do something, you'll do it. It's like that.
But you said, right, like in his adult life, he's actually preaching, right?
Yes. And
okay, so
he's also disgusted because like he knows all these people, and he knows like they're all just like they're all just a bunch of just savage. Well, not. Oh God, how do I describe Preacher? Because it's crazy.
let's. You don't need to go into too much detail at this point because I already know. Like again, I've never read this. I think I watched a couple episodes of the show, but I have no memory of it.
Don't watch the show. Read the comic. That's all I'll say.
So
just read the comic.
He's had trauma from a hyper-religious background. Then what happens? He becomes what he hated. He becomes his trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
He becomes a preacher. So again, and what is that? That is irony.
Yeah.
It's irony.
True. Yeah.
So again, that's what I mean. These are extremely powerful, very simple things. And they don't just have to relate to that. They could be physical things. They could be like character traits.
I enjoy Saga. There's a character called Marco who fought in a war, but he doesn't want to fight anymore. He's a pacifist. But he also finds throughout the story that he's sort of drawn to violence in a way. But, I don't
there you go.
I don't want to spoil things.
Irony. right? It's also ironic because he is with who? Who is he with? Who did he make a baby with?
The enemy lady,
There you go.
Elena.
Irony, ding, ding, ding. See,
Yeah,
it's everywhere, man. Like I think that it really helps to understand these concepts because once you do, everything starts. It's like all everything starts coming together. You'll look at a character like Marco or the preacher, and you're like, or like
yeah. She's
Shigur,
gusher.
or like you're like, wow, they're so complex. How did you ever,
I
dude?
really,
You can break it down extremely
I
simply.
would really
Simply.
love a fuck communism like lighter like he has in Preacher. Oh man, that would be great. But yeah, no. It's one of the things I always gripe about when people are always like, "Oh, our Preacher's too edgy." It's like it has some great characters. Okay, like come on.
Yeah, but again, it's about these concepts, these very simple
Yeah,
concepts, and then granted, to create interesting characters with these concepts can be a challenge, right? Not every character who has these things is compelling, but I think it's extremely helpful to take characters you admire, villains you admire, and use these terminologies like irony, like trauma, like wants and needs, and apply that to them. And you can put it out, you can map it out and say, oh, holy shit, this isn't as complicated as I thought it was going to be. And then hopefully, if you're creating your own stories, then you can
well,
run the same checklist off your own.
I mean, I brought up Marco from Saga, but my favorite character from Saga is the Will, who's this assassin. Because I don't know, I'm just kind of
I actually
it,
have a signed print on my wall of the will.
oh, do you? That's great.
I do.
But
It's great.
what like I'll go more in, like you were talking about tragedy earlier and how he like fall like how Glocta like falls back. Well, the Will kind of goes through that in I don't want to spoil because I know you're not caught up, but basically like you see through the story like there's a flicker in him, even though he is a ruthless killer. And like he has very little qualms about what he does, but there's a flicker inside of him that wants to do good. And he has this little girl that he cares about, and he has Gwen, who's also Marco's ex-girlfriend, but you know, I don't want to talk about that whole thing. But like he didn't get well. There's a bunch of shit that happens. He gets stabbed. He gets addicted to drugs, and then he's given the option to like go back to that or go back to what he's used to doing, and he goes back to just doing the violence. Just goes back to the violence, which you're like, you know, and that's kind of what you were talking about, the tragic. You know, you're like, damn it, you know.
But it's yeah, but it's the irony. It's he cannot overcome his demons or he cannot change who he is. And so a lot of people think that characters need to arc. They don't always have to arc. They don't have to
You can arc by
learn their
you
lesson.
can arc by keeping them the same. You know, that's why.
Uh,
Or well,
I
I
mean, I
think there's
guess it
different
depends on
ways
how
of
you look
doing
at
an
it.
arc. Like there is the arc where they change, but there's also arcs where they try to change and they just don't. Like you know.
Yeah,
I
I
can
guess
name a
so.
couple
Yeah, I
things
guess
like
you could
The
argue that that
Sopranos
kind that's a tragic arc. That's a tragic
or
arc. Yeah.
First Law does that. The Will, Rorschach. At least I think so. He doesn't really try to change though. That's again, Watchmen's a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's why
Um,
I yeah.
uh, who else? I mean, you know, or you know, I mean, they're or you know, I could mention like Tenma from Monster, maybe. That's a good one.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it. But I mean, if you want to start listing their
You
whole
should
story,
read
we'll
Monster. I
probably
think you would like that. I know you don't like manga
yeah.
that much, and I generally don't read a lot of manga either, but I think you would like Monster. I really do.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, if you want to start listing his qualities, I guarantee you we're gonna find all of the same stuff. We'll just see.
He's a. It goes back to irony. Here's a peak one for you. So, Dr. Tenma, nicest dude around, wants to help as many people as possible, believes all life is precious. Well, one day he is told by his bosses to like save this one guy because he's more important. He does it. The other guy dies. His widow gets all pissed off and he feels bad about it. Well, another time, there's a kid who shows up, and then there's this other person that shows up. Well, he decides to go against his bosses this time and save the kid first because he came in first. He saves the kid, but oopsie, turns out this kid is the epitome of pure evil, and might also be the Antichrist. But so basically, the whole journey of that is him trying to make up for that mistake, or well, if it is a mistake, if you really want to get into that. But basically, the quandary he deals with is he going to be something that he is not supposed to be, a killer, or a guy who saves lives, is grappling with if he can take one. So
there you go.
Irony for you right there.
There's irony for you right
love
there.
That.
That's what I'm saying, man. Like all of these things, like if a character is missing these, they're probably not a great character.
I would agree.
Like I challenge anybody to find a character that is well loved in some regard, who is missing some of these attributes.
But yeah, like again, going back to you, but like, what's a character that you really enjoyed, that you were like, man,
oh man,
this is a quality, excellent. I would kiss this author if I met
well,
him.
I know I already talked about Breaking Bad, but I mean, I think Walter White is one of my top.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's kind of tough because a lot of times characters for me, it's like about the full thing. It's not necessarily about just that isolated
Like, have you read a book recently where you're like, man, those characters were really interesting and they went through a really great arc? It's like
like I just read The Heavenly Table.
I thought you were gonna mention, like, I was about to say, I know you mentioned Donald Ray Pollock recently, so I was curious
incredibly interesting characters because they all have such specificity with them. They they're so weird. Like I talked about in my review, there's a guy named Jasper. He's 27. He walks around. He cleans outhouses, so he shovels shit.
Is that the guy with the big Johnson you were talking about?
Yeah, he's got a huge Johnson. So it's so big he can't get fully hard.
Oh my God.
So it's a blessing and a curse, right? But he has this weird. So he wears a helmet and he walks around with this club, and he kills rats and stuff that are crawling around and shit. But he also saves, like, sometimes women will drop a baby on accident, or sometimes someone will purposely throw a baby in an outhouse.
Wow, that's
like a
that's
dead
kind
baby.
of sad. It would do
So
that.
yeah, and again, I mentioned this in my review, but he's a side character. This is how deep this Donald Ray Pollock goes with his characters, and he had a very religious mother. His mother like called the doctor to basically like shorten his Johnson. Like, can you cut it off or something? Can you cut it in half?
God, dude.
This is, I mean, because these are very ignorant people, and
I don't mean to laugh. That's horrible, but
no, it is horrible, and that's what's great. And there's a great scene in the book too where he like hits himself, like he punishes himself because
what he does, like
he has this trauma.
Just, like,
yeah, exactly. But it's with his his Johnson, and so this trauma, this past trauma with his mother and all that, because she's dead now, it hangs over him. But on the surface, he's like this dirty dude. He walks around carrying dead rats that he killed in outhouses, and then he's got a club, a helmet. He calls himself the sanitation inspector because he really values his job. And everybody's like, Jasper, you just clean shitters, And he's like, I'm the sanitation inspector. And so, again, a really cool, well-rounded character. And there's something I would talk about, but I don't want to spoil the novel at the very end that really...
Well, don't. I
it
haven't
really
read
speaks.
it yet, but...
I won't. It won't. But it really, you're like, oh man, that's good. That's good with that character specifically.
I'm reading Cormac McCarthy. I'm reading.
Cormac McCarthy.
It's kind of weird because McCarthy likes to work in like the allegorical.
Yeah,
So-
a lot of his characters are like, they're not people. They're like,
Well, if you talk like Judge Holden or like Anton Chigurh.
yeah, right.
They're
They're
interesting,
forces.
but it's not like
They're forces.
Yeah. They're interesting
they're
because
not-
of that. But
that's purposely why I didn't really bring up Cormac McCarthy, with the exception of The Road, because The Road is accessible.
Well, The Road is a very allegorical. Well, not. I don't want to say allegorical, but it's a very like.
It's a timeless story.
It's a mythological story. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Kind of, yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it's. I don't know if I'd say mythological. I would just say it's a simple story because it's incredibly relatable. If you have children, right? At some point, humans generally have children, And so you can relate to this thing, and it's all something we all have to face, right? Sometimes, like take alcoholism.
Uh huh.
Not all of us are going to be alcoholics. Take
Sure.
smoking or drug habits. Not all of us are going to do those things. Granted, not all of us are going to have children, but are biologically, like, we have this drive to, I mean, we have to have sex, right? Which is really just to have children, right?
Well,
We
unless you're
just,
like Carol and other people who are anti-natalist, you want to have kids.
well, I mean, I'm not saying everybody needs to have a kid, but I guarantee you Carol wants to have sex. And you know what that
Well,
is? That's just this deep-seated desire of, like, it feels good because nature wants you to reproduce. Like, that's all
yeah.
there is to it. But
Well,
anyway, what I'm getting at is that's why it works. It's that it's a very common thing. And for example, if you're never a parent, you're a child because you exist.
mm-hmm.
And so there is that's what's so beautiful about the road is it's not just the father to the son relationship, it's the son to the father. So, like, say you, Britain, let's say hypothetically you never have kids, you have a father. So you
Yeah.
can read the road and still get a powerful experience out of it.
Well, yeah. But the thing I was trying to say is I'm reading well, I'm slowly getting through it, guys, but it's Suttree from him right now, which is probably it's such a weird book because it's because there's not really a plot. It's more of just like it's one of those books where it's kind of the vibe where it's like but there's like all these like kind of weird characters that take place, like for instance the main character Suttree is this guy who for some fucking reason decided, you know what, I have this pretty good life, college education, I have a wife, I got a kid, but you know what I really want to do, I want to go and hang out with the dregs of society. And that's kind of basically the book. And it's sort of like and it's sort of doing characterization though, because it's kind of like, well, what does he want? He wants to like live this sort of like life of squalor, but like what does he need? Not entirely sure. I
Which
know
is
you haven't.
funny because Sutri is, I think I've read his most autobiographical
It
novel, and you'll
is,
know if
yeah,
you
it
know anything
is.
about, yeah, if you know anything about Cormac McCarthy, he's like, I'm never gonna work. I'm just gonna write, and I'm gonna write until it works, and I'm gonna let all my 3 or 4 wives just support me while I do this thing.
Yeah.
So there you go.
No, 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 no. But it's just kind of interesting because like there is characterization in the book, but it's not like he goes through like an art. Again, it's kind of like about the vibe, that he's going for. Like here, it's like this study of all these like kind of crazy people. Like there's one scene where a dude has sex with a watermelon. So like it's not very far into the book, so it's not too much of a spoiler, but again, it's kind of weird. I like it. It's I haven't disliked a Cormac McCarthy book, but it's kind of odd when you talk about him because it's like, what do you say about his characters? He can make good ones, but it's kind of like he's
Yeah,
more about like he's very much into like archetypal, in a
yes,
way.
yes, that's what I mean. That's why
It's
it
like he's on
feels,
like this level, while
yeah.
sometimes I'm like we're like here. It's like you were
Yeah, he like
kind of stealing from you there, if you don't mind.
right. Yeah, Llewellyn and Shigur, they're not characters in the traditional sense. They represent things. And
Sure.
and that was clearly important to Cormac McCarthy. Whereas I feel like something like The Road, yes, they represent things, the child and the father, but there's enough there to there's like an actual arc.
Well, I
So
mean, there's an arc in
I
No
think,
Country as well. Llewellyn takes the money and then he's fucked.
and he dies off the page.
Though there's one officer, I think it's hilarious. I actually reread, if you remember, I reread No Country not too long ago. There's one guy's like, well, I saw this guy. He came out of a hotel and these Mexicans start shooting at him. And then he just started shooting at him and basically vividly describes what happened. I'm like, oh, thanks, officer.
Yeah, but he's dead. Like we don't witness it. We hear about it after the fact.
So,
That is one of the most ballsy things I've ever seen
it's funny.
a writer do. Is
It's
that
funny.
you have this hero, quote unquote hero, and he dies off the page. Like, you don't get to witness this thing. You're like, holy shit! What is this book about?
Yeah, it's
Because
almost like
Llewellyn is set
it's
up
yeah,
set up to be the hero, right? I mean, at the beginning, he feels like he's gonna go out and do some good or whatever.
Or I'm
Selfish,
reading
but
a book called Beyond Redemption right now, which is sort of they call it grimdark even though I don't really like the term grimdark, but that's beside the point. Basically, a bunch of the characters in this are like sociopathic nutcases, which kind of makes sense, I guess, because the world basically how it works is the crazier you are, that means you're more powerful. The crazier you are, the more powerful you are in magic. But what I like is
really,
that,
so it's like
yeah,
shit. Because I was thinking about an idea like that. I was thinking that magic is more about the only way to tap into it is if you're a little off your rocker. Is that how it works in that book?
yeah.
Or is there magic and then it gets better if you're crazy?
Maybe I'll explain it more like to you in another point, 'cause it's kind of weird, but dang it, now I just lost my point. But I guess what I'm saying is that the characters in this are not good people. Which I guess I'll try and dispel this is one of the things that kind of is a pet peeve of mine is when people say, "Oh, these characters aren't likable, so this book sucks." And then I sit here and I'm like, well, you don't have to make likable characters to be interesting.
Clockwork Orange.
Yes, or First Law, even though
Yeah.
no,
Mm.
I wouldn't call Glocta a likable person. Like, would you?
No,
like,
no, no,
I'll
no.
ask you,
Yeah.
Jason. Would you hang out with Glocta? Like, if you saw him and were like, hey, there's my boy right there.
No.
Would you do that?
Probably not. Probably
Okay,
not.
there you go. So I'm right.
Yeah, Prince of Thorns. Prince of
Yeah,
Thorns. Unlikable characters.
I talked with Raphael from Raf Blutext or Blutext. It's basically German for blood axe, but anyway. I remember he was like, "Oh yeah, I didn't really like Prince of Thorns because it's just violent for no." Basically, his complaint was it was violent and with all this crazy shit, but it felt like it didn't really amount to much. And I'm like, I didn't read this book, so I won't comment on it. And he's like, okay. But I wanted to see what you had to say about that, Jason, because
I love the trilogy. I think
you were all like, bro, man, if I met Mark Lawrence, I would hug that man. Pretty much.
Yeah, I think he did something that it's what's funny about Mark Lawrence, and again, I have a very non-mainstream tastes, but
We like
I read
Cormac
that
McCarthy.
fantasy. Yeah, I was getting like I was just getting so tired of fantasy. Fantasy to me was too samey. Everybody was like a Sanderson. And then I read Mark Lawrence and I was like, same thing with Joe Abercrombie. But when I read Mark Lawrence, I was like, holy shit, like this is doing something interesting. Finally. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Again, I'm very drawn to dark stuff.
I know.
So if you're
I
not
think you
into
would like
dark
Beyond
shit,
Redemption because
yeah, I bought it in 2016 allegedly, so I have
did.
it.
Also, there's the beautiful cover art from Richard Anderson, so there's
Which
that.
why in the hell did the
I don't know.
book 2 and 3, man?
It's
Oh
funny.
my god.
I was
Oh my
on.
God.
I actually became acquainted with the author recently, so I'm like, so I asked him the other day. I'm like, so when you were writing this, because there's some really grotesque shit in this novel, and I'm like, so when you wrote this, actually, I'll pull it out right now. Hopefully he doesn't mind that I use this, but it's whatever. Let me find it. But basically, I was just kind of giving him a hard time. I'm like, so when you were writing this, were you trying to be as disgusting and unpleasant as possible? And he basically went, nope. The thought never crossed my mind. I had this idea in a dark place. I think he meant to say at, but there's just a T there at the time. That stories with character arcs were bullshit, and that most people were basically incapable of learning. I had the title before I wrote the first word, which makes sense, because a lot of characters in this are horrible people. The whole point of the story was to write about characters who were beyond redemption. I wanted people who clung to their illusions/delusions, because that's what I saw every day. The characters were me fucking around with the typical tropes. The aging axeman, the great swordsman, the thief, the innocent child who will save the world. I didn't even realize it was disgusting until after. And then there's a specific part that later, but that's basically what he was getting at. So
Yeah, so he was exploring trope subversions. He's like, what happens if I write a story about people who are beyond redemption?
haha, yeah, no, it's but yeah, no, it kind of drives me crazy when people are like, "Oh, these characters are unlikable. This book sucks." I'm like,
Generally, I feel
you
like,
can have
so
good
me,
you can no, good character doesn't always mean that they're likable per se. Like I
right?
see
That's
people being like,
exactly.
"Oh man, Glockta, bro, he's my favorite character of all time," but I'd be like, "Well, when you complain about Blood Meridian, I'll ask you this, with a straight face, would you hang out with Glockta if you didn't know a single thing about him?"
I mean, by looking at him,
Yes,
well, yeah, probably not.
exactly. So it's not that it's a lazy. Well, for one, I think it's just a lazy criticism. Is what I think it is. And admittedly, I have done this before, but I have learned since then. Like Lolita, for instance. Humbert is a monster of the worst sort, but at the same time, you grow to understand him. Even though he's bullshitting himself, basically, you still understand where he's coming from, even if it is horrifying. Same thing with, like, Patrick Bateman, or Alex from A Clockwork Orange, but that's I think you can make a character about unpleasant characters.
Well, I think with Patrick Bateman, the difference is that he wants it to end, right?
He wants to end?
Subconsciously, yeah, subconsciously he doesn't want to do this anymore. There's a great scene at the very end of the book
Well,
where
yeah, I think what's interesting
there's like
about...
no exit. Basically, he's trapped, kind of like Glockta, right? He wants to get caught subconsciously, like a lot of serial killers stereotypically do, right? They do things because they subconsciously want to end it, even though, like, on the surface it appears as if they just want to keep killing. And then at the end he realizes, like, there's no way out of this. This is just me, and that's it. Like, I didn't learn. I learned about myself that I can't change.
I don't... But that's the thing about Bateman is I don't think he wants to change, though. It's kind of like he's stuck with these two things, these two ideas.
No,
On the one
I think he
hand,
does.
he wants to be like other people. Because that's why he's always like, that's why he's always toning himself. That's why he's always talking about the next big thing. Because he wants to be like everyone else. But at the same time...
Have you read the book, though, or are you talking
Yes.
about the movie?
No, I've read both the book and I've seen the movie.
Okay.
But at the same time, he wants to... He hates everybody. He hates all the people he even hates himself. And he wants to be separate from them at the same time. Which, again, kind of goes back to that wants and needs thing that we were talking about earlier.
I still think he wants to be caught, though. That's exactly what
he does want to be
final
caught.
that final
I'll agree with
image.
that.
I don't mean he wants to be caught. He's not consciously thinking about it.
That's what I
but
meant.
that
by
is his
he
actions.
Wants to be separate.
Yeah.
He wants to
Well, his
be... He's caught between those two things. That's actually what I think makes a great character. Give them two conflicting things that they want, and then just kind of, maybe not wants and needs, but two conflicting things, and have it kind of clash. Because Patrick Bateman wants to be like everyone else, but at the same time he hates all these people, and he wants to be different from them. He wants to
and what's that?
He wants to be notorious.
And what's that?
Get caught being a serial killer.
Irony.
I thought you were like being the... I thought you meant like in the story. I'm like, hey, he wants to be caught as a serial killer.
It's ironic.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's ironic. He wants to be like everybody else, but he hates everybody. It's irony.
I'll be right back. Oh, kitty.
Oh, I guess we're doing an impromptu bathroom break, maybe?
No.
Oh, no, there he is.
Cat is my partner in crime. Come here. But yeah, no, it kind of bothers me when I watch on book 2, people are like, oh man, those characters are so good. But why? So that's kind of why I wanted to do this. That's why I wanted to do this video here today. So,
well, that's what I try to bring to my channel, is that there's so many booktubers out there, like...
back on that. Like, what makes a bad character? No, I'll try and... this is going to be very simple here. But bad characters are... people kind of being dragged along the story. They don't really feel
Well,
like people. They just feel like
a bad character just
players.
lacks all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. It's that simple. You don't have trauma, you don't have irony, you don't have a flaw, you don't have a want and a need. There's a
Like
laundry list of other things I could talk about, but
for
you don't have those
instance,
things.
I was
Bad
kind of
character.
let down by the Black Tongue Thief earlier this year because the characters weren't that interesting. Well, let me back up. I wasn't interested by the main character. It's like, because, sure, he has this conflict that, hey, I owe money to this thieves guild, but at the same time, that doesn't really go, or, well, you've read the Black Tongue Thief. You could probably put it a lot better than I'm trying to right now, but I didn't really feel his, like, what does he want out of his life? What does he need from his life? It's more like the story was just kind of dragging him along.
Well, what's his flaw?
What's his flaw? Oh shit, man.
Exactly.
I don't fucking know.
Exactly. Problem number one.
He's a smartass. He can't fucking shut his mouth.
That's not really a flaw.
Well,
Flaws go
it
deeper
can
than
be.
that. I mean, it's a surface flaw. When I'm talking about flaw, it's a deeper thing. It's like
Okay.
uh, I don't know, but again, that's my point is that you don't know. That's one reason why he's a bad character. Well, what kind of trauma does he have? Does he have trauma?
Well, you read it.
Not really.
I didn't say he had. I don't think he's just kind of. He's the same guy at the beginning, and he's like only kind of different at the end because like again, outer circumstances changed.
Well, again,
Like,
let's break this down.
All of his conflict that I remember from the story was like, how do you put it? I don't want to say outer because that just sounds stupid, but all of it was Jason. What's the word? It was.
Well, here's again. Let's break it down.
Oh, okay.
I can't think of a flaw,
Okay. I
like a
can't
good
think of
flaw,
one
like
either.
a deep flaw. I can't think of a trauma, really.
I guess,
Yes,
like,
he owes money, but like,
I guess
so
he
what?
like. I mean,
That's a plot device. What's irony?
he
Is there any irony?
There is a romance in the story, so I guess like
Which is
he wants to,
bullshit.
like he wants to
No.
like connect with other people, but like it's
Yeah,
not
that
really developed all that well.
no, that plot line was garbage. This is what I mean. Like he's lacking all of these things, and that's why the book is not good.
Yeah. No, I agree.
That's why he's forgetting. And I think Christopher Buehlman just got so tied up with the voice of the character and the world that he
Now-
forgot to do
now
the characterization.
Like the titless lady, the like war the Fofford basically because it's basically Fofford and the Grey Mouser. Like I'm like I kind of want to hear what she has to say. This guy is kind of not really.
She's
doing
boring too, though. They're all boring. That's the problem. There's not
there
one
was-
character
there was-
that's
there
interesting.
there was like there was the or, how do I put this? There was potential there, Jason. That's what I'm trying to say. There was potential.
Of course, there's potential in almost every
The
novel.
smart
It's
ass
just-
thief, I felt nothing. I'm like, that's why I'm
Right.
kind of like, I want to see it from more of her perspective. It's because it's like there's potential there for an arc. Why is she doing what she's doing?
Even her arc was
and he
boring.
doesn't really,
Yeah.
really do much. Is the gripe I
No.
had.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Now
Like,
he kind of
it's-
like he kind of turns against his thieves guild, but it's kind of like I don't care at this point.
you don't care because it's missing the things we're talking about. That's what I'm saying.
Like, what are some bad
Again.
characters? Like, what is one where you were just frustrated and you're like, man, this has bad characters?
Oh my God, where to begin? Daniel Green's A Witch's Sin. I just finished it a little while ago.
Oh boy,
Terrible characters.
Oh yeah, what happened?
Well, like I said, they don't do anything. There's nothing interesting about any of them. It's funny because they have these things to a degree, like the protagonist has a flaw. Or not a flaw, sorry. Well, yeah, she does have a flaw. Her flaw is that she's headstrong and just will barge into any scene, kind of overconfident, right? That's kind of her flaw. She will get into situations because she desires something so much. Okay, but she has a trauma. Her like, I guess her fiance, I think it was, died, but it's
Oh
never
no.
worked into the story in such a way where it affects the character. Where you're like, oh shit, I see why this character is doing all these actions. Green is just like mentions, oh yeah, had a fiance, died, and then let's get on with the story. It's like he's ticking a box of these things that he's read about in writing craft books, but he's not actually using
Well,
them to
that's
his
not good.
advantage.
Don't do that,
No,
guys.
yeah. So it felt like an anime where
An
I
anime.
mean like a bad anime,
A
honestly.
bad anime. There's good anime.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you want to talk about good characters in anime. Cowboy Bebop, Spike Spiegel. What does he want? He wants to be a
Oh my
space
God,
cowboy.
it's been too long.
Hey, shush! I'm talking here.
Oh, you've interrupted me like 10 times in this whole thing.
I know. I'm sorry. My dad was getting after me over that the other day. He's like, "You should stop interrupting people." I don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you do interrupt people often. You should. There's a rhythm to conversation.
It's not. I'm not trying to be a dick. I promise. It's just. Um. But going back to Cowboy Bebop, like, what does Spike want? He wants to be a space cowboy. He wants to eat noodles. He wants to kick ass and have a good time doing it. But what does he need? He needs to confront the past. He needs to shed the weight, to use language from Cowboy Bebop. He needs to confront Vicious and, face his destiny and all that, as Star Wars would put it. But there's also other anime that's just, weird bullshit where everyone looks like they're 12.
Yep.
But anyways, cut back to what you were saying. But I agree with you. If the characters don't have flaws or anything that make you like not care, give a shit what's going on, it kind of loses you after a while.
Well, it's just not. It's not just the character in isolation too, though. Like I keep saying, it's how the other ones. If you have a cast of characters, how do they interact? How do the interactions reveal the flaws and reveal all this trauma? Yeah, that's why it's
Exactly.
so tough to balance a large cast of characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a strange thing, It's what's another example? I mean, I pick on the Black Tongue Thief because it's just like, good lord. Now I could pick on the Devil Takes You Home. I want to say the Devil all the time, but it's the Devil Takes You Home. I hated that book, but it's not necessarily that the characters are like, it's like you said the other day. When you pick up on what the author is doing or what the writers or whatever are trying to do, kills the story. That was a problem
Yeah,
with that book. It wasn't like the characters go through an arc. I don't think it was a very compelling arc, but it was an arc nonetheless. It's just, ugh. I hate that book so much.
I need to read it because I'm curious how I'd feel about it.
I just, I hate it. How did it win a Shirley Jackson Award? Actually, I'll talk about a book with characters. Not that I think that they're bad, but it's just kind of like I thought was kind of interesting because you like this series, but especially the first book. But Annihilation, the I mean, you could argue that the film has like better characterization than the book does. Though you do get a look into the biologist's head in that book, so it still works, but it's just kind of.
I think, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the film is a much more cut and dry character exploration than the novels. The novels are kind of dreamy. They're kind of surreal. They're kind of you just feel it's almost it reminds me a lot of the film Stalker, where you're just kind of like experiencing this stuff, these emotions, and the events that are triggering these emotions, and I don't know. I feel like I always get lost in those books.
No, I mean there is characterization in those books. Don't get me wrong. Like we do see inside Control's head in Acceptance, not Acceptance, Authority and Acceptance. Um, in Annihilation, we kind of see inside the biologist's head, or whatever her name is. I don't. She's called the biologist in the first one, so.
Yeah, yeah. It's I
Isn't she,
really need to read those again.
isn't she called
Been
Ghost
too long.
Bird?
Ghost Bird, yeah, he calls her Ghost Bird, yeah. Or she calls herself that, right? Or her husband? I can't remember. Yeah.
Um, now Bourne, I think, has great characterization, but you don't like Bourne because
Um,
you're a terrible person. I'm kidding, but
I I would say I don't like Bourne. I would say I was let down by Bourne. That's all.
I still think Bourne's a masterpiece. But um, Jeff Vandermeer is good at creating good characters. I think.
Yeah, I think Vandermeer's strength is, yeah, he creates interesting characters, but it's kind of the I feel like he blends character and setting really well. It
I
almost
agree with that.
feels like it's this weird, just intermixing thing where, especially, well, I mean, literally, right? His works are usually character mixing with the setting,
Yeah, I'd agree
right?
with that.
Especially in the Southern Reach. So it's kind of, I don't know. It's weird because it's almost like you're looking at these characters from afar versus experiencing the story through them in a way. It's kind of it's hard to
But
articulate.
why does it still work for you? I guess I'll ask that.
I think because it's just so immersive. I think it's the immersion that really hits me. And then the Lighthouse Keeper, his story was great.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that was a really beautiful ending, which is kind of why I'm both excited and worried for these three new novellas coming out. Because I thought it had such a great ending, and it's like, what's gonna happen?
Um, but going back to what makes bad characters, yeah, no. If there's no like flaw or trauma or whatever, it just kind of it's just like a wet fart. It's just nothing.
Mm-hmm. It's a wet fart. Well, I wouldn't say a wet fart is nothing. Wet fart is definitely something.
Yeah, it's like it's there for a moment and then it's gone. Like, I mean, do you
Yeah.
read a James Patterson novel for like the great characterization? No.
Nah, nah. He's novels like that, like Lee Child, and it's for a different experience.
Well,
Which
well, there's people who say Lee Child's a good writer. Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt
I
you.
don't think he's a bad writer. I mean, granted, I never made it through Jack Reacher #1, but just because it wasn't for me. But I was never like, oh, the writing's atrocious in this. It just didn't grab me, and I think that's fine. Not every book's for everybody, but
Um, I guess we'll get into this conversation then. Who are some writers or some directors or just people in general? It doesn't really matter who can create some just really great, memorable, excellent characters. In your mind, I know you probably have some opinions, and I do. We probably
yeah, I
agree
mean,
on some of those.
I think we've talked about a lot of them. Cormac McCarthy creates great characters. Donald Ray Pollock, Joe Abercrombie creates great characters most of the time. I feel like his newer stuff, he's a little. I don't want to say he's losing it, but I think he needs to move on to something else, like a different world.
Yeah, that's kind of
He,
my
he's
gripe
starting to
with.
get a little too samey. I read
It's
his
kind of my
first book,
gripe
and
with a
the
lot of people like George Lucas or Neil Druckmann. It's kind of like do something else. Like you had this
yeah.
beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful thing, and I still love this beautiful thing, but go and make other beautiful things. Don't just don't get
Yeah,
don't
I mean,
settle.
George R. R. Martin, great characters. I think he's a great character designer
I
for
agree.
sure. Um,
I was gonna say like Stephen King.
yeah, Stephen
Um,
King has some. Yeah, I would say
Stephen
so.
King. Lahane. I read Michael Chabon recently. He's good at creating great characters. Um, Here, how about you rattle off some other ones while I keep thinking?
Oh man, well, we can't forget the Clockwork Orange cast. There's some great little guys in there, but I've never read anything else he's done. I would say I've always found Ray Bradbury's characters to be very compelling. He's always a huge favorite. He's always been a huge favorite of mine because what I love about Ray Bradbury is he doesn't ever try to overcomplicate anything. Everything is so simple, but it works. It's like this plainly simple, great story. You know,
Also,
he
his
doesn't try
work is
to.
magical. Just
Yeah,
I don't know how he does it, but
I don't know, but you could tell that he was the kind of guy. If you've never read his memoir on writing, I guess you know the Zen and the Art of Writing. You really get a sense of this guy and who he was and what storytelling meant to him, and that's why it's so magical. Neil Gaiman, I would say, creates some decent characters.
oh yeah.
Um, I don't know why I can every time we're on these damn calls, I can never think of anybody. So I got to turn around.
I was gonna add Alan Moore to that list.
Yeah, well, with the Watchmen, yes.
Um, Mignola. I know we both love Mignola.
Oh, Clive Barker has some interesting characters from time to time. They don't
I haven't
always
read
land,
Clive
but
Barker.
there's some cool stuff.
China Mieville can create great characters. There's some I'm like, I don't, what the fuck, but he can create great characters. Marlon James.
I
Um,
need to read Marlon James.
Dude, read Black Leopard, Red Wolf, bro. Do
I
it.
know. It's on my list. It's on my
Do
list.
it. No, McCarthy, but McCarthy's interesting because like his characters are. It's almost like he's telling modern myths. You know, it's really weird.
Yeah, I don't.
It's
Yeah,
it's
they
bizarre.
never feel real to me. I think, which is weird because I love realistic feeling characters, but his characters never feel real. They just feel they're entertaining to read.
They
They're
jump off. I'll say that.
yeah, they're very colorful, vivid characters with a lot of detail, but most of the time, I wouldn't say all of the time. But yeah, they're really. I don't know. Cormac McCarthy just he has that way of writing that really just pulls you in. At least me. I know a lot of people don't like. Well, some people can't. He's not accessible, I wouldn't say, for the average reader, but good stuff.
Well, I mean, Stephen King is kind of one I often jump to because like he just has a way where we talked about this in our pros video, or we talked about it somewhere. I forget where, but we talked about it. And you mentioned like he has this way of creating these, just they feel real. They feel like real average people. I don't know how he does it, because
Yeah.
you'd think he'd create like these kind of weirder characters because he kind of is this kind of weird guy looking dude, but he can create these like really he can create these really he creates the most real characters, if that makes sense. Like there's different kind. Do you think there's different kind of characters? I'll ask that.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Like, do you think there's like, you know, there's like these levels of characters, like these characters who just feel real, and then there's like these characters that just jump off the page, and then like these like kind of archetypal characters. Like, do you think you ever thought of it like that?
No, but I can see what you're saying. So yeah, I would say so. A real character to me is like you said, like a Stephen King character, because it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I know that guy, or I've known somebody like that. They feel like that kind of middle America. Just he captures the Americana really well. Stephen King does, and so that's why all his characters are kind of in that realm. But then you have someone uh, where they're interesting, like Cormac McCarthy's characters, but they don't necessarily feel real. They feel stylized to a degree, but still you're drawn
Archetypal
in.
is what I
Yeah,
would
they're
say.
archetypal. And then you have someone like Donald Ray Pollock, who he really straddles that edge of almost going into caricature, and that's why I say leap off the page because they're larger than life often. And but that's a really delicate thing to balance because you don't want your characters to feel just so stylized that you don't empathize with them or you can't imagine them existing in the real world.
Charles
So there is a
Dickens.
spectrum.
Well, I was about to say, if you like that, you would like Charles Dickens a lot. He has a very similar, like, he can create Charles Dickens. I would add to that list. He can create these really weird, vivid people. Mark Twain. Uh,
John Steinbeck too. I think
John
he's a good
Steinbeck. Yeah.
character. person. I mean,
Can't.
again, Steinbeck is focusing on a very specific demographic, let's call it,
Or I was
which
about to say he
a lot of
can.
writers do.
Sometimes he kind of rattles off on his, you know, what he thinks. Jeff Lemire, in terms of comics anyway. Garth Ennis.
Brian K. Vaughan.
Brian K. Vaughan. Feels so bad. Like, have you ever read Why the Last Man from Brian K. Vaughan?
I tried it. I couldn't get into it. Yeah.
What? I thought you'd like that.
Yeah. I just something about it just really didn't. I don't know. I got a
You
few
like
issues
Saga.
in. I think.
That's funny.
Love Saga. Love Saga.
Oh no, I love Saga too. It's.
Saga's great.
I need to have like a big group chat about Saga because, like, oh my god, I know so many people who love Saga, and I'm like, I could talk to those people about Saga. But,
Yeah, you should.
But yeah, Brian K. Vaughan definitely. Well, I like Michael R. Fletcher's character so far. He creates some really weird, interesting ones. I'd say Scott Lynch. Did I say Scott Lynch?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from what I remember, I've only read one of his books, but yeah, I enjoyed his characters. I mean, I feel like everybody we've already kind of talked about fits under this list.
I know. It's like it's fun talking about these things, you know, or at least it is to me. I know there's some people might.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I enjoy it. Yeah.
Um.
It's funny how I always draw a blank. Let me pull up my Kindle library to see.
Now, I was giving you a hard time the other day because, like, I looked at your Goodreads and you have like 79 you're reading right now. I'm like, damn, dude, you're just like in that Scrooge McDuck tub of books, man.
Well, they're all digital, but I would say Robert McCammon. So I'm reading A Boy's Life right now, or
Oh, I need
Boy's
to read
Life.
him so bad. I want
It's
to read him so bad.
I'm really enjoying that book a lot. Nick Pizzolatto. How do we forget
Oh,
that
dang,
boy?
how'd I forget him? Shit, Vince
How do we
Gilligan.
forget him? Yeah, I'm scrolling. I'm
Well, Vince
scrolling
Gilligan and
through.
crew, I should say. I don't want to get
Yeah, Vince
all the credit.
Gilligan, fantastic. Who else do we got here?
David Chase.
Already talked about Ray Bradbury. I mean, Bret Easton Ellis. I've only read one of his novels, but you know, Patrick Bateman is a very he's
Chuck
a character.
Palahniuk.
Oh yeah, of
'Cause you were
course.
just-
How did I
'cause
forget?
you were just
But
like
but
you were just like, give me some more of that Fight Club the other day. A few
but
minutes ago.
Chuck Palahniuk caricatures. I don't ever feel like they're real people, and I think that is my. As much as I love reading his books and as they're super fun to read, and he's just a brilliant writer, the characters never feel like living, breathing people to me. So
I would say I could also mention Robert E. Howard, but that's kind of a weird thing because, like, it's,
Onan.
he can. I'll put it that way. He can do it.
Kazuo Ishiguro. He's one of my favorites.
I
He
need to
does a
read
lot
him.
of great characterization. You never read Kazuo Ishiguro? Holy man! Oh
I
man,
know. I feel
you are
bad.
missing out, my friend. Dan Simmons, I think, especially with Hyperion, fantastic characterization.
Another one I need to read.
I'm still scrolling here. Let's see, man. I got Jesus. I have so many books. Richard Matheson. He's always a favorite of mine.
I do like Matheson.
I Am Legend was a transcendent novel for me. It really, really impacted me.
Let me look over here.
I guess that's all I got right now. I'm probably
I like
missing.
S.A. Cosby a lot, but you know, he's created some great characters.
God, I have so many books I need to read.
Oh, man.
Scrolling down this list makes me sad because I'm like, oh, I want to read that. Oh, I want to read that. I really liked Augustina Bastarrica, Tenders the Flesh. She created some fantastic characters. I've only read one of her books, but yeah, I mean, man. Oh, who else? I thought I just saw something. No, never mind. Yeah, I don't know, man. You know, for all the criticism I give Christopher Buehlman, I would say he can create an interesting cast of characters sometimes.
I
No,
mean,
not so much the Black Tongue Thief, but
I mean, the characters in Those Across the River I thought were cool.
yeah,
But,
yeah, that's what I'm
I
saying.
thought they were pretty good, but I also had the same kind of like, I don't know. There was something missing there. I liked them. I thought they're. I mean, I made fun of them a lot because I'm like, good lord, they are the horniest protagonists I have ever seen in my life. But um,
Yeah.
but no, I thought they were fine. I am going to read Between Two Fires this October, so I'm looking forward to that.
Mm.
What'd you think of that? I
Uh,
saw you did a review.
it was one of those books where I love so much about it, but then it just never comes to fruition. It kind of really, Christopher Buehlman has this third, fourth, however many acts you believe in. I'm more of a 4 act guy, so I'm gonna say like fourth act, it just crumbles to pieces. Where you're like, what was this? Um, yeah, it's really strange, but again, it has so much beauty in the beginning of the book, so much like horrific. There's some of the most
I've seen some
interesting.
people
There's,
compare it to The Road, which I thought was really interesting.
I mean, I could see how someone would do that, but it doesn't have that kind of power. At least to me, it doesn't.
Well, yeah, you
But
have a weird
yeah,
relationship with fantasy, so.
yeah, me too. I feel like as I've gotten older,
No, I said
again, I'm
you.
reading.
No, I said you did.
Oh, me.
I'm
Yeah,
in
I
the.
do
I'm in the. I
because
love it. Give me more.
it's funny because I grew up on fantasy. Like I was obsessed with fantasy as a kid, and all the way up until my man, I guess my 20s or whatever, until I started discovering other genres or like trying other genres and going like, oh, what? Holy shit! This is like a way different experience and a deeper experience than I'm used to with fantasy, and that's why I asked you a long time ago. Have you ever has a fantasy novel ever emotionally hit you? And it's never done to me. I'm not saying a fantasy novel doesn't exist out there like that, but and maybe they're not trying to do those things, but I've never read a fantasy novel that I've been like that gives me pause, that makes me think. Those are the kind of books I like.
Really, not even the first law.
No, I mean I enjoyed it. It was a great ride. It was very, there was cool characters and it was new. It felt new. It
Like
felt like
you didn't
fantasy
feel
was
bad
renewed.
that you didn't feel bad that Glocta and Logan and Giselle didn't overcome their flaws. Like, no,
No, it didn't. It didn't. It never hits me
I did.
emotionally. Fantasy doesn't for me. I don't know why. It just doesn't. Yeah,
Eh.
I'm still looking for one that makes me feel, man. But I have yet to find a fantasy novel that makes me feel.
I don't know. It's um. Let's see. I was gonna mention somebody and then I just forgot. Well, I would say Neil Druckmann, but I'm kind of mad at Neil Druckmann at the moment. What was that?
Did
You
Neil
like The
Druck
Last of
did
Us?
did Neil Druckmann really create Joel and Ellie in isolation? Of course he did not. So don't give him that much credit. Yeah, I
Um,
ran out of authors. I think I named all the ones I can think of. I'm still
uh,
scrolling down my endless Kindle list.
Jason Aaron, in terms of comics, that totally just came back to me there. Jason Aaron can. Um, Southern Bastards has some great characters. I would say Ed Brubaker as well. I didn't want to mention him because I'm like, I don't know, but he can. He creates some good ones. He has that
Can't
thing.
say I've read them.
You got Reckless, didn't you?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. It was all right. It was fine.
Yeah,
I give it like a solid.
I wouldn't say it's one of his best works, but
Yeah,
it's enjoyable. But
yeah. It's decent. I'll say it's decent.
uh, no, I don't think I have any more like ones who can create like great characters anyway, because it's kind of tough actually. I thought this would be easy.
No, man. Well, it's funny because I feel like like I said earlier, for me, it's less about characters in isolation, and it's more about just the whole mix of everything, like the experience of the story. With the exception of like the real standout ones, like Walter White. He's an incredibly standout character where you're like, dang, like you can think of him in isolation, and you're just captivated. Whereas a lot of the stuff, like I love, there's a lot of books I love, but it's not necessarily the character in isolation that really pulls me in, you know?
Well, then
It's
what's
kind of
all
just
this talk
how,
about character you're always going on about if you don't
well, you
think
have
about
to
it in
have a good character.
isolation?
You have to have an interesting character, but it's like story is the balance of character and plot and theme and all of these things. And like generally, when they all work really well, there's not one thing that stands out the most, you
Fair
know?
enough, I guess. But
And,
it's
and I
just
think,
kind
I
of
don't know, like, yeah, I wish I had more. I'm sure I could write down some characters that really stood out to me. Well, like in Tenders the Flesh, his name is Marcos. Like he was an interesting character to me. Like I
you really like
I don't know.
felt his
It was
pain, you know.
yeah, it was a very effective experience, like a very expected or effective sort of journey, I guess, with
Okay,
him.
there you go. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I often think. Well, when I think of great characters, I think of characters who I can, in isolation, like you were saying earlier. I'm like, man, that's a, or I thought that's
Well, it's
that's
funny. Well, it's funny because when I think about that, when I try to think of someone in isolation, I always end up going with like the expected, Conan the Barbarian, or like Robert E. Howard, or like Logan Nine Fingers, or Indiana Jones, or someone like that, where it's almost like they. It's hard to explain. It's almost like they live in this little capsule that could exist in any story, I guess. Versus, some characters like fit the story and like the story needs them and they need the story. Whereas I feel like someone like Indiana Jones, it's maybe because they're very pulpy characters, and so they can exist outside of um, the narrative because you can throw them into any narrative almost. Because I think that's an art in itself, is creating like a singular good character. I don't know, but let's just say Jack Reacher. People love him, so creating that kind of character that people want to continue. Sherlock Holmes, to keep like reading and reading and reading because they're so fascinated by this person, less about the journeys. That's just part of it.
sure,
But
yeah. Um, but aside from that, I think that's all. I feel like we've
yeah, we've gone
barely.
a long
Yeah, I
time.
know, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface here. But I think we've. I think we've gotten it all down. Characters should have flaws and things you should care about, and if they don't, then they're pretty bad. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I mean, yeah, I highly suggest everybody out there go check out The Secrets of Character by Matt Bird and The Secrets of Story by Matt Bird, both great. Also, The Story Solution by Eric Edson, fantastic book that will help you on your journeys to articulate what makes a good character.
Well, you might have to actually send me those because I kind of want to read that now because I'm always looking to improve my craft.
Yeah, you got to read.
Um,
I think reading is great, but also reading craft books is
um,
something everybody should do.
well, I did want to talk about some of the characters we made, but you know what? We can save that for another time. Uh,
We made?
that you created, like for Song of the End of the World, and like I
Oh,
created for A Plague of Nightmares.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we could do
So
that. I mean, we could.
that's
I don't think that'd be a long video, but yeah, we could definitely talk about our thought processes behind those people.
yeah. Maybe well, I wanna publish it first. Hopefully, I can do that. But
You
um,
can.
oh, cat's back. Yeah, my partner in crime. Oh yeah, that's right. Laird Barron can create some cool characters. I think. I really liked. I just covered Blood Standard on my channel recently,
You did.
and he liked and followed me on Twitter. So that was pretty fun. Thank you, sir. But anyway, but yeah, I think we've talked about all we can for characters. It's been fun, Jason.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on.
And I'm sure when I think of other things we can talk about in terms of writing, we'll probably do it because But I knew you'd probably jump at the feet for character because even though sometimes you baffle me because I'm like, oh, what are some specific characters, and you're just kind of like, But aside from that, I still love you, Jason. You're good people. Also, I'm really hungry, so yeah. Missed that.
Damn,
But,
you're eating this late? What
yeah,
is it
no.
over there, like 10:30 almost?
Yeah, no, but yeah, let people. If you have any final thoughts on character, but share it, or if not that, share where people can find you.
Oh yeah, sure. Like I said, go check out those books I mentioned. And you can find me here on YouTube as well as my website, as well as Amazon. So just look up my name, and there I will be.
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd and Goodreads, as well as Discord. Which, hey, if you want to come chill with me on there, come and see, as that movie says. But yeah, anyway. So I think that's all I got for today. Until next time.